I remember it was 4th of July, right after my senior year. So a few months after this happened. And I was celebrating at a friend's lake house, and I slept in the same bed as another guy, fully clothed. He was fully clothed. We did not touch each other. And I woke up the next day hysterically crying and called my gynecologist and said, I slept in the same bed as a guy. Am I pregnant? And I mean, obviously that's not possible. It was extremely irrational, but that's just where your head goes. It's like, oh my God, this terrible, scary thing happened to me. Is it going to keep happening? Am I just doomed and going to be pregnant every other day for the rest of my life? Which sounds so silly in retrospect, but it really was how I was feeling.
Hey guys, it's Alana.
And Jonah.
And welcome back to another episode of Seeing Other People.
We
still haven't gotten
executed.
You say it was perfectly executed. It was not.
Disagree, but hey, that's what we're here for. To
agree to disagree.
Agree, disagree.
Yeah, well, I'll let you take it away with what we're going to talk about today, because I think we should jump right into it. This is definitely a really important topic and an important episode. And I think some of our episodes are a little more lighthearted and entertaining. And this one's definitely a more serious topic. Jonah, if you want to go from there.
Why don't you tell us what we're doing today, Alana? I feel like it's easier. I feel like I'm here to, in today's episode, I'm here to listen and learn and be a active learner in this episode. So you tell us what's going on.
Fair enough. Okay, so on this episode, we are bringing on someone who had an unwanted pregnancy and went through the process of finding that out, having to tell friends and family about it, having to decide whether or not she should tell the person who she got pregnant with, and then deciding and going through with getting an abortion. And obviously this is a controversial topic. And a lot of you listening right now might be saying, well, I've never gotten pregnant. That's not going to happen to me. I don't need to listen to this. Whether or not you have or haven't, or may not, I think it's a really important thing for us to discuss, because you never know if it's going to happen to you or to someone you know. And it's also just an important thing for us to be able to know how to talk about, and people don't talk about it enough. And I also definitely want to hit on the angle of, if your friend or someone you know or a family member ends up getting pregnant, how do you actually approach that situation? So we have a guest with us who is going to remain anonymous, and I will let her explain why. But thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And we are so, so happy to have you. If you want to briefly introduce yourself, sans name, go for it.
Hi. Thank you, Alana and Jonah, you guys, for having me. I have to say, I don't listen to too many dating podcasts in my day-to-day. I'm more of a crime junkie kind of gal. But when I listen to you guys, I feel like I'm there, and I feel like I'm a part of the dating drama and the dating scene, and it really pulls me in. I also want to shout out the fact that, whether you guys realize it or not, obviously your target audience are people who are dating and people who are going through all the conflicts of ghosting and meeting people. And what I don't know if you guys even realize is your content is also so valuable for listeners who are in serious relationships. I mean, I've been in a relationship for 2.5 years now, and I'm constantly listening. There's such a thought that once you're in a serious relationship, everything's amazing, everything's bells and whistles, but it's still real life, and parts of being in a serious relationship are even more complicated than being single. So I want to compliment you guys on everything you say and do. Is really hits so many more audiences than you might even realize. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you. We appreciate you listening and being open to learning about things that you think like surface level might not relate to you, but end up relating to you. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Not to mention, I just love listening vicariously to your guys' friendship and flirting, or lack thereof, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, Alana, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. Alana's right. I am going to remain anonymous, and that is the unfortunate truth of a controversy such as an abortion. I'm very open to speaking about it. I've told so many friends and family members, and I've even helped some friends go through something very similar. But the sad truth is there's still such a negative dilemma and people see abortion as such a problem, which, in today's political climate, we all, of course, have our different views. But I also do work with children and want to remain anonymous. But my hopes is that in a year and a few years from now, more women come out and feel like they can talk about this and normalize the term abortion and not feel like they're going to be judged or penalized in this world for doing something that, or having to go through something that really was unplanned.
And going off of that, what you were about to say, like doing something, like, yeah, it happened because you did something that not necessarily we all, but the majority of us have done. And it just happened. Yeah. It just happened to happen to you. I assume like you never thought like, oh, that could happen to me, but then it did.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly did not plan it. And I have to say in my story, which I'll get into in a moment, there were really low lows and really high highs from it. And I think that the bigger picture is not what I went through, but what I took out of it and how it's shaped me as a person, which is why Alana and Jonah discussed with you why I'm open to coming here today and sharing that story.
I love that. Well, if you want to get into it, why don't you tell us when this happened, what chapter of your life you were in, and what was really going on when it happened and when you found out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to start off before I say exactly what happened. My story is authentic. This was only about me, completely original. There are tens of thousands and millions of women who have gotten abortions and have had extremely different stories than me. So I don't want listeners to automatically assume it's the same. I was very lucky in my situation, all things considered, and I was very privileged. So I just want listeners to keep that in mind. Anyway, right into it. It was senior year of college. I was casually seeing someone and we were casually having sex. And it was one of my friends was going to a date night and called me on that Friday night and said, I'm going to my date night in 3 hours. I'm kind of anxious. My period's late. Can I come over and just you watch me take a pregnancy test? Can I hold your hand? And I said, yes. She came over. She brought a pack of pregnancy tests, which come with 2. And I looked at her and I said, weird request, but can I actually use your other test? Because now that you've mentioned it, my period is late. She takes the test. She's negative. We're kind of giggly and laughing because neither of us actually thought that this could ever happen to someone that we know, let alone ourselves. Then I take the test, wait 3 minutes, and there were 2 lines on it, which means that I am positive and that I was pregnant. So my immediate reaction, believe it or not, was to start cracking up. And that's not because I thought it was funny or was belittling what was happening, but it was because it felt so out of this world that this could ever happen to me. And it did. So automatically I told 2 other girls that were living in the same house as I was at the time. And they insisted on taking me to an urgent care right away. So we did just that. And I went to an urgent care and took another test. And again, it was positive. So I tried calling my parents because that was what I needed to get over for me. I said, as soon as I'll tell my parents, I'll be okay. But the minute between finding out I was pregnant to the moment I could speak to my parents and confess to them and get their advice was probably the worst few hours of my life, because the conflict was they were on an airplane to Colorado and had just taken off when my test was positive. So I could not reach them for another 5 or 6 hours. So therefore, instead, I called my older sister, and she said something to me that I think completely changed my life, because it's what got me through that moment, but also just reminded me that I'm not a bad person because I was pregnant. She said, you're not a bad person. You had sex and you got unlucky. So I am hoping that listeners really hear that. I mean, abortions are a cause of having sex, which I would say most college students are doing. And if you go through this, or if you know someone that's going through this, just remind them that you did something that is such a normal thing for especially college age students to do. So I spoke to her for a while, and then I told a few more other very close friends that I had, at the time. So then I proceeded to go to my room and had 3 or 4 of my best friends sit with me. It was a Friday night. We were all supposed to go out and party at a frat. And the friends that I have, thank God, were like, F this, let's get 17 pints of Ben and Jerry's and make you giggle and laugh until your parents land and we can call them. Flash forward 6 hours, my entire body was shaking profusely. Because imagine calling your mother and dad saying, hi, I'm pregnant at age 18. I kind of just went out and said it the second my mom answered. I said, hi, Mom. I don't even know how to say this, but I'm casually seeing someone and we had sex and I just found out I'm pregnant. And her response immediately was, you're pregnant? And then I heard my dad in the background go, who's pregnant? So that was a very terrifying moment. But after they had time to process it, which in retrospect was probably 7 seconds, but it was probably the longest 7 seconds of my life, my parents said, okay, well, we will figure out together what you want to do, how we're going to handle it, and everything is going to be fine. So I did grow up with a background of always being extremely pro-choice. So for me, it was a very easy decision. I knew the second that I found out that there was no way I was at a place in my life that I could raise and take care of a child. So I elected to have the abortion. And my parents, of course, supported it. And so having their support and my sister's support, I think, is 100% what got me through those first few hours. And then ongoing. So, following that conversation, of course, I went to a Planned Parenthood on campus. I had one best friend that I took with me, and she was my rock during the whole thing. She came with me to the initial consultation, which was really hard. I mean, they took an ultrasound. They asked if I wanted to see it, and I did, which I don't regret. I mean, I was curious and also don't think I could have comprehended the fact that there was actually a growing fetus inside of me unless I saw the photo. She told me how many weeks I was. And then after your initial consultation, you obviously make the appointment to have the abortion. So a few days later, maybe it was a week later, that same best friend took me. She sat in the waiting room for me and I got it. And what many people don't realize is you are awake the whole time. You're not given medication. At least I wasn't. I was given 2 Advil. And that was it. So then I rented a hotel room with that same best friend that night. And we stayed in and ate more Ben & Jerry's and tubs of Nutella. And I went through it. So I want to open up time because I know I just told my whole story, but I do have a lot of thoughts after the fact of where it led me to today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And you shared that really beautifully. And of course, you've had like years to kind of process it and figure out your thoughts and feelings about it. But that, like, I had chills and tears while you were explaining that. And obviously, I'm really happy that your family and your friends were so supportive. And I definitely have a few questions in terms of what were your actual fears in this situation? Because I think we don't think it's going to happen to us. If it did happen, I think there are a lot of things that we'd be afraid of. And I'm wondering what your fears were first, like when you found out and after you went to urgent care and they confirmed, like, yes, you are pregnant. And I know your biggest fear was like telling your parents, but what was your fear, I guess, in telling your parents? And then also, I'm definitely curious if you told the guy that you were seeing and how that all played out.
Yeah. So biggest fears. I mean, yes, telling my parents, but more so just I'm their little girl. I'm their youngest daughter. Are they going to look at me differently? They were okay to the fact that I had sex. I mean, practicing safe sex. Actually, no. So something I should have mentioned at the beginning of the story is I have a blood disorder, which means I'm really prone to clotting, which does not typically affect my day-to-day, but it does mean I can't take hormones ever, including birth control. So I was not on birth control at the time. I had to go old school and use condoms. And despite being effective, clearly they don't always work. So, Alana, you asked me what some of my biggest fears were. I mean, at the time, as many college girls can relate to, it was, what will people think of me? How will people look at me? Will guys ever want to be with me now that I'm broken, in a sense? Which is what I was thinking at the time, which I very much learned was not the case now. You asked if I told the guy. I elected not to. As I mentioned, when I started telling you we were in a casual relationship, I didn't think it was right to put him in that imposition because we weren't serious enough and we didn't have that strong enough relationship. This was something that I really struggled with and consulted with my friends about and weighed back and forth. And still today, I don't know if I made the right decision. And, people might say I disagree with what I did in not telling him, but I just didn't think, as two college seniors that didn't have a deep enough relationship, that it was the right time and place to involve him.
Yeah, I respect that. And I understand that. And I can think that I probably would have made the same choice. But Jonah, as the guy here, do you have any experiences with like friends or just people who have found this information out and kind of like how that went down?
I don't have any friends who have openly discussed it. Or when I do find out about something like this, it's very, 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 very secret, to the extent of like, it's a word that shouldn't even be spoken, which like, I don't know. It sounds like maybe that's not the most healthy thing in the world. Like it should be more normalized to discuss, but, I don't really have any friends who have told me that this is something I've gone through. So.
Yeah.
I think you said it perfectly, Jonah. I mean, there is such a desire for either those going through it or those who know someone who's going through it to make it such a secret because it's such a problem in society since it is so controversial. So if we keep having these conversations, I mean, ideally I can come back in a few months and say, hey, it's me. This is my story and I'm going to tell you it and I'm going to be proud to tell you it. And it's not because I'm embarrassed of it. It's because of the risks that it comes with and just how it can affect me ongoing.
Yeah. Speaking of ongoing, I know you mentioned before that one of your fears was how guys that you were going to see in the future were going to accept you or if they would want to date you or not because of it. Can you tell us how that has unfolded for you? And I know you said like ultimately that did not happen and they were okay with it, but what was it like dating and having sex with people even after this happened?
So that's a really good question. And that was actually the most difficult part of the abortion for me, was not the actual day of the abortion or the time in which I was pregnant, but it was definitely the effects afterwards. I was in therapy for anxiety and it only increased times 1 million. I remember it was 4th of July, right after my senior year. So a few months after this happened. And I was celebrating at a friend's lake house and I slept in the same bed as another guy, fully clothed. He was fully clothed. We did not touch each other. And I woke up the next day hysterically crying and called my gynecologist and said, I slept in the same bed as a guy. Am I pregnant? And I mean, obviously that's not possible. It was extremely irrational, but that's just where your head goes. It's like, oh my God, this terrible, scary thing happened to me. Is it going to keep happening? Am I just doomed and going to be pregnant every other day for the rest of my life? Which sounds so silly in retrospect, but it really was how I was feeling. So it took me a little bit of time to start having sex again. And I was obviously extremely careful, even more so than I had been. Once I was ready to start having sex with a guy, I made sure it was serious enough that I would want to tell whoever it was. But that was the other scary part was, okay, if I was serious enough with a guy and I opened up and told him about this, would he then reject me? Would he see me differently? Would he want to break up with me because I was no longer this pure woman who's never been impregnated, you know? So eventually, flash forward a few years, I did have one semi-serious relationship and I opened up to him and he was accepting of it. That didn't work out. currently, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I am in a serious relationship, and it was about 2 or 3 months into us dating that I started feeling real feelings. And I remember we were on a hike, and well, first of all, when I had the abortion, I remember promising, like, I will be open about this with whoever I end up with and my children, because why am I going to hide such a big part of me about something that was so monumental in my life? So we were on this hike, and I kind of just said it. I said, hey, in college, this happened. It was extremely unexpected. I did what I thought I needed to do, and I don't regret what I did about it. But this is who I am. And I was extremely relieved when he was open and asked me questions, and, not only did he accept the fact that I've been pregnant and had an abortion, but he also asked questions and really wanted to understand what I went through. So I think that was a really large part of the journey, was like, oh, this person can love me and want to almost go through it with me rather than just making it part of my past life. So, flash forward 2.5 years, we have an adorable puppy and an apartment together. This is something I've struggled with telling people. And as years have passed, I've opened up to some more people, and I want to keep talking about it. That's why I was so excited to come on this podcast and share my story. I
have a few questions, and I'm going to put them all out there now just so I don't forget them. But we can go one by one. So obviously, like, you're in a serious relationship, and I really appreciate what you said about your boyfriend wanting to kind of go through it with you and not just have it be a part of your past. Have you thought about, like, in the future when you actually decide, like, I do want to have a child, like, do you think that's going to be a scary experience for you?
No.
We'll talk. Yeah, let's go right into that, and then I'll hit you with the next.
The reason I'm so quick to respond no is because no. I work with children for a living. I love children. I've always wanted to be a mother of a few children, and one pro of being pregnant earlier in your life is, you're fertile. So no, I think that when it does happen, I'll be ready. And it really doesn't scare me, but I do want to emphasize how long it took me to get there. This wasn't an overnight, it happened and now I'm okay. This happened, a lot of therapy, a lot of hours on the phone with my gynecologist, who I also call my therapist at this point, to get to where I am today.
Yeah, I can imagine. In terms of, like, your gynecologist, is this someone who you felt like you could open up to before and were comfortable with before? Like, suddenly you had to rely on this person, your doctor, and you had to lean on them and go through this situation with them? Because you mentioned, like, you've called them multiple times and have really relied on them to be almost like a therapist to you. Did you have, like, what you felt like a strong relationship before? Because I know me, like, I go for my annual checkup, and, like, I don't have necessarily a doctor that I feel like I could confide in. And I do wonder if that's a problem,
Absolutely. That's actually a great question. I didn't have a tight relationship with my gynecologist, also would go see him annually. But that said, coincidentally, he is also the gynecologist of my sister, my mother, my aunt, and my grandmother. So he knows the line.
Wow.
So he was just, like, a very warm and family man. So it wasn't that I was so close to him initially, but it was that he made me feel so comfortable, and answered to all of my calls and knew how much I was struggling and was so there for me. Now, I only see him for my annuals now for the past few years, and, like, I'll be sitting on the table waiting for him, and he'll come and he'll give me a hug.
Oh, yeah.
So that's actually a really good point for women who are going through this. I think it is really valuable to have a doctor that you can ask anything to and call at any time of night, and will give you their cell phone number and whatever you need.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And it's good that you were able to really trust him and still know that you're safe with him. Okay, my next question, and I feel like this is something we all could benefit to hear from, is, like, if obviously, like, you had to go through a lot, this I'm sure impacted your senior year of college and beyond. What do you think your friends, like what role did your friends play in this? I feel like most people who are listening are going to be at some point potentially in the role of the friend. And I would love to hear how they can best be a friend to their friend going through this. Or if if they end up in this situation, like how would they want their friends to be to them? Because it is often hard for us to tell our friends what we need.
So the friend that was there for me for the abortion, that friend was the one who really got me through this because she talked about it with me whenever I wanted and listened to me cry whenever I needed to. And to an extent, I felt like a burden. I mean, anyone going through something so traumatic is going to feel like, oh my God, I'm chasing away my friends. But she just let me know that there was nothing I could say or do that was going to scare her away. So I would say, tell your friend that you're there. I would also say, tell your friend that they're not alone. I mean, when it first started, I think I had only told 4 or 5 friends. And as years continued and conversations began, I told a few more friends and a few more friends. No, I still haven't opened up to that many people, but I was so afraid of the judgment and just projected that so many people would not understand. And I was so wrong. In fact, one of my best friends now, we weren't that close, and it had come up once, and I told her, we were on a subway. I remember this so well. I told her that what I went through, and she looked at me and goes, I had an abortion in college too. And I think you'd be surprised with how many women have also gone through this. So if maybe I'm being repetitive, but if you're a friend, just be there, remind them they're not alone. They had sex. They're not a bad person. That's the biggest message. Take away. You're not a bad person. You're not doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You need to do what's best for you. You need to do what's best for, if you decide to raise that baby, that's wonderful. And if you don't think you're ready, then that's also okay.
What advice would you give to someone who might be listening, who's going through this now, or who's someone who might be listening to this is going to go through this? Like, what is your overall, like the lessons you learned and what you wish you heard? And I know obviously your sister's piece of advice really stuck with you and helped you through it. But as someone who went through this, like what would you tell other people?
Find your person. You're not alone. And I promise you it'll get easier. Whether it takes a day or 7 years, the idea of it gets much easier. And don't force yourself to do anything you don't want to do. I mean, you're your own person, and thank God we do live in a society that allows us to make these decisions. And women need to stick together. I absolutely believe in today's current environment. And and what I said to Alana before we recorded this podcast is, I know I'm coming on this anonymously. That said, I really do want to help women, and I want to help anyone that's going through either this or something similar. So while I'm not identifying myself for reasons I've already said, if you feel like you want to talk to me, you can DM Seeing Other People or Alana, and I have given her permission to give my contact to someone who really does want support.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us. I enjoyed being a part of this episode and hearing about your story. As everyone knows, this is Seeing Other People podcast. You can find us on all different platforms, but please reach out over email, seeingothepeoplepodcast@gmail.com, if you want to reach out to Alana and I, who can then connect you with our guest who just spoke.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I really feel, I feel like, I mean, I learned a lot. Jonah, I'm sure you did too. And yes. I think it's something that I'm really, really glad that you volunteered and reached out and said, let me tell my story. The second you said that, I was like, fuck yes. And I hope that people feel like they were able to take something away from this. And I hope that people feel like they can go and have a conversation with someone, a friend, a family member, a coworker, anyone about normal. I mean, we say the word normalizing so much, but really normalizing it, because like you said, sitting on the subway with someone who you weren't that close with, you brought it up and she said, that happened to me too. And I think that's kind of the moral of the story here, or one of them, is that like, it's something that we don't talk about, and it's something that happens, and it's something that we need to talk about.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me and listening to my story. And listeners, if you think Jonah and Alana should date as much as I do, like and subscribe.
And with
They didn't pay me to say that.
We are out. We'll see you guys next week.
Thank you.